This is the Weekly Music Business Show for January 4th, 2016. This week, Ari Herstand joins us to tell us why Spotify is being sued for $150 million. We'll also talk about Netflix and their dominance over the TV industry. Can the streaming music services replicate their success? And if you're in a metal band with 500,000 likes, can you at least make minimum wage? This is the Weekly Music Business Show. All right, welcome to this week's show. Chris, welcome back to North America.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Jet lagged and everything.
Yeah, so you've been back in the United States for, 48 hours?
At this point, we are not quite at 60 hours.
Okay.
Yeah, by the time I have to get on another plane tomorrow morning, it will be about 60
hours. And
you're
headed right to CES, going to do some coverage for us there. You're going to be able to pick up the latest music business information right from the CES floor.
Yeah, I'll see what I can scrape away from the Sony and Intel guys. For those who might not be familiar, I work with a company called Zivix. This year we have a booth at CES. We're kind of plugging our main product, the Jamstick Plus, and our kind of sister product, the Puck Plus, and then teasing a new product that we'll announce in February. So
nice.
We have never done a booth before. Usually we do these kind of press interviewee things, which kind of keeps me hopping around to different locations to meet people and do the same kind of 20
Now they have
minute
to come to you.
Now they find us, and I'm captive and can't escape.
Yeah, those things are insane. I've done a few of them where you have like these appointments and you have to stay on schedule, and then the weird guy comes in and takes all your time, but hopefully buys a lot of products. So
yeah,
well, very cool. We have a really, really special guest this week to help us cover some very important information. He actually was an author of an article that's one of our biggest stories we're going to talk about this week. An old friend, I think, of both of ours, Ari Herstand. I'd like to welcome him to the show. We get the background applause. How's it going, Ari?
Great. How you doing?
Great. And you're coming to us from LA, right?
Yes, from West Hollywood. More specifically, but yeah.
Very cool. So, it's great to have. I can see you because we're on Skype, but it's great to hear your voice again.
Yeah,
it's been a long time. So, what are you doing out in LA right now?
Well, I actually just got back from a trip as well. I guess 2 weeks ago. I was in New Orleans for about a month, and I was on a writing retreat there. I just finished a book, actually.
Nice.
So it's on the music industry. It's going to come out this fall. It's with Norton Publishing. And so I was under deadline, and basically I had 8 months to write it. But of course, a month before the deadline, I was only about 40% through. I'm like, all right, I need to turn everything off.
I've heard that from a lot of authors, that it's like, as long as you have the deadline, you're going to wait until
totally.
2 weeks before it's done to write 90% of the book. So
yeah,
what's the book going to be called? Do you have a title yet?
It's tentatively called How to Make It in the New Music Business.
Very nice.
Very
fitting.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I have this podcast maybe you should check out.
Totally, yeah.
Of course, you've been doing Ari's Take for, 7-8 years now?
No, actually, just about 3 years.
3 years, okay.
Yeah.
I feel like it's been around forever, and of course,
nice.
I see your articles being passed around,
Sure.
very organically through digital music news and Ari's
Awesome.
Take. You get tons of traction on the internet, so we're really excited to have you as a guest today.
It's been very cool to kind of see the response. And I mean, I initially started Ari's Take just to kind of put everything that I learned from my own music career out there, because I was getting so many questions from independent artists on things that I was just doing independently on my own. So I just kind of put it all out there because I didn't have enough time to respond to everyone's questions. And it kind of, I'm glad to see that people respond and that can be helpful. So yeah,
absolutely. I've learned a lot just from reading the blog, for sure.
Awesome. Thanks.
So let's get into the first story here today, which is what brought you in. Spotify being sued for $150 million by class action lawsuit led by David Lowery, the lead singer from the band Cracker, which I think a lot of people will remember. They had some big hits. I know he's moved on; he's got another project right now, but Cracker's definitely where he got his most of his juice to pull off some publicity like this. Now you read the headline, and it really is like tabloid fodder, right? $150 million. Spotify, I mean, that's a fairly sizable sum for really any company, if you're not the Apple or the Googles of the world. could you wrote a great article on Digital Music News, and I know it's been posted on Ari's Take as well. Really lays out everything in layman's terms, and I highly recommend everyone just search for why exactly is Spotify being sued, and I'm sure it'll show up right on the first result of Google. But could you walk us through, without reciting the article, detail by detail,
Sure.
why is Spotify being sued?
Yeah, basically, it's for songwriter royalties and licenses that Spotify has not paid out or also obtained the proper licenses that they need for. It's called a mechanical license and mechanical royalties, which are for songwriters. And so just to make the distinction, which is very important, and this stuff is super confusing and it's like insider baseball because, people on the outside don't, and a lot of musicians and people in the industry don't really understand the distinction between all these royalties.
That's kind of part of the problem, right? Is that the people who are doing the business, it's like, someone who's selling donuts not really understanding the ingredients or the profit margins that come along with selling the donuts, right? We need musicians that are educated. So
just to break it down in a nutshell very quickly, there are royalties that are generated for the recording, the sound recording, and those are generated for the label and the artist because they recorded the sound recording, the master. And then there are separate royalties that are generated for the composition. And these are completely different, and that those composition royalties are generated for the publishers and the songwriters. And so Spotify has been being sued specifically for the composition royalties, and more specifically, they're called mechanical royalties, because technically under U.S. copyright law, any streaming service is required to obtain a mechanical license before, it's actually legally 30 days before the song goes up on their service. They need this license. And it's the way to get the license is either by negotiating directly with the publisher, or which pretty much most services go this route, is sending what's called a notice of intent, NOI. And that is all you need to do is basically just send a letter to the publisher saying, hey, we want to use your songs, that these are the songs, you have to lay them out on the sheet, and just letting them know the notice of intent that they're going to use them. And then once they send it, then they obviously have to pay those royalties. The problem is there's no database anywhere that has all this information. So there's millions upon millions of releases out there. And especially now within the last 10 years, where pretty much anyone can, like you or I, can just upload a song, distribute it today through DistroKid, and it's up on Spotify in a day. Like, how is Spotify supposed to know that the song that I just distributed today I wrote? And then, or maybe it's a cover song. How are they supposed to know that? And then who's the songwriter? Who's the publisher? Who owns the composition? How many songwriters are on it? So there's no database for this information. And it's kind of broken up around in various places. So like, sure, U.S. copyright, the Library of Congress has a database of all songs that have been copyrighted, but some songs haven't been actually legally copyrighted. A lot of independent artists don't copyright their songs, so that's not a complete list. Sure, if you've registered with ASCAP or BMI or your PRO, there's going to be some information there, but it's also not complete. So the problem is that there's no list anywhere, and so Spotify. And I also want to make clear that Apple Music is in the same boat as Spotify. So even though Spotify is being sued right now, Apple Music could very well be sued next week because they're running into the same issues. But basically, Spotify doesn't know who to pay for most of or not most, but a lot of their songs in their catalog, because they just don't, they're having a hard time tracking all this down. So what they've done is
not available, right? It's just there's no organization.
Well, the information is not available, or they just haven't taken the time to figure it out. There is a lot of information available, but they haven't dedicated. Well, I take that back. They have dedicated. They've actually assigned these duties and jobs to the Harry Fox Agency, HFA. So everyone is blaming Spotify, but I would argue that it's actually Harry Fox's fault, because Spotify entrusted this seemingly capable organization, Harry Fox Agency, which this is all they do, is track down mechanical royalties. That's the entire organization, is just calculating mechanical royalties and then paying the proper parties. So they're the ones who really dropped the ball here. And I mean, granted, the buck stops with Spotify because they're the ones who run the service, but all these services, they're either hiring Harry Fox Agency or Music Reports to do these calculations. So yes, everyone's blaming Spotify because nobody really understands where all this is happening. But I would I would more so blame Harry Fox Agency for not doing their job that Spotify paid him to do.
I think you made a really good point in your article that, everybody wants a villain. Everybody wants to say that this is all Spotify's fault.
Right.
And you can try to pin it on Harry Fox, but the truth of the matter is that there just really is no database. There's no global entry system. There's no way that all of this information can be immediately accessible by anyone who wants to license a song,
Right.
which, hopefully, as you kind of ended your article with, hopefully that someone can come up with a solution to this, right?
Yeah, and the thing is that we need to work together as an industry, as a music industry, and with the tech industry. And the problem is that the music industry, for some reason, just likes fighting tech and instead of working with them. And as I mentioned this as far back as Napster, but like everybody saw these problems coming. And no one in the industry that had the actual power, the resources to do anything about it, chose to do anything about it. They didn't do anything about it when they knew the internet was here and people said, hey, MP3 downloads are going to be a thing. They're like, we're going to keep selling CDs for $19 a pop. They're like, let's not worry about it. And then Napster came and everybody freaked out and like, all right, let's just sue all the fans who are downloading. It's like, well, that's not really smart because these are just music fans that have found a better way, a more convenient way, albeit it's illegal. But like try telling that to a 13-year-old who has a connection. And the same thing. I mean, this was happening with streaming. It's just like because of all these digital royalties, revenue streams, but also digital files and streaming. And there's so many more royalty streams because of the digital landscape. I mean, Cobalt Music Publishing has calculated that there are over 900,000 royalty streams for one song.
Wow.
So we're in this crazy digital era where there's so many possible royalty streams from all over the world over these different services. And so the industry has done really nothing to try to solve these things. Like everyone could have come together and be like, all right, let's create this master database list and let's do this 10 years ago. And let's, so there's an issue there that the industry should be coming together to fix this, but it's not really in their best financial interest for at least the labels or the publishers because they've had a system worked out for years that worked for them where the labels calculated where these mechanical royalties should be paid. This was before streaming.
Sure.
Because mechanical royalties are also for downloads and, Spotify is being sued for the streaming, but mechanical royalties are built into downloads and sales as well. And traditionally, it was the label's responsibility. So iTunes wasn't on the hook to pay out the mechanical royalties for downloads. They would just pass all that money to the label, and then the label, it was their responsibility to track down the publishers and say, okay, here's your mechanical royalty.
Yeah, because it was reduced friction, right? So
right
on the iTunes side, and that's the traditional music purchase idea is that there you got the mechanicals, or if it's going to if it's going to end up on screen somewhere, sync royalty, that kind of stuff. It's funny that you kind of you indicate or implicate, that might be a heavy-handed term, Harry Fox here. Harry Fox Agency has been around for forever. I mean,
as long as recorded music. I believe.
I mean, it's been around for a while, and yet I know that there've been, I don't want to say suspicious, but basically, Harry Fox is. It's an old world clerical system, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's basically, you got a bunch of paper being pushed and, they've got a bureaucratic process that they work through. And now, we're looking at a system that things are obviously moving much faster. And Harry Fox is completely, I think, overmatched. Yeah. I mean, would you agree that, I've only bumped into a handful of Harry Fox representatives in my entire lifetime. And the last conversation I had with someone face to face was, just like, well, we've got some things that are moving, in a digital fashion, but it's still largely, the digital version of send me the paperwork.
Right, and absolutely, and that's one of the biggest issues, and probably why they sold to CSAC, one of the performing rights organizations of America. CSAC bought Harry Fox Agency, so hopefully they'll be able to turn things around. But yes, absolutely. I mean, they weren't prepared either for the digital age that came upon us, and I mean. Audium, run by Jeff Price, who is the founder of TuneCore, who no longer works there, but he started Audium, which is a digital rights collections company, a couple of years ago, and they've been leading the charge to collect royalties as well. He was basically saying to Spotify, like he went directly to Spotify and said, "Hey, here you go. I did all the work for you. Here's millions of lines of data, and here's every owner of every track here, composition, sound recording, everything. I've done all your work for you. Now just pay me." Audium is basically vying to take over from Harry Fox for Spotify for this, and everybody else, because Audium started as a digital rights collections agency. Same with Cobalt, and they were built for solely digital. Whereas like Harry Fox, like you said, they weren't built for digital. They don't understand digital. They don't know how to work digital. They don't have tech people, or at least enough tech people involved that really can navigate in this new digital world. So, but unfortunately that they've been doing it so long that everybody just looks to them to solve the problems. And I mean, really, U.S. copyright law is outdated, and we're trying to follow these U.S. copyright laws that take way too long to get ratified, and the payment structure is all over the place, and there's multiple bills currently in Congress that are trying to get passed to ratify these things, but it just takes forever. So, there's a lot of different forces that have gone into this that have created this issue, and everyone wants to demonize and vilify Spotify, and I just don't think that's fair, because the thing is that, like, I think streaming can be very beneficial for the future of the music industry if we work together with streaming companies and not just vilify them and scream that they're not paying us enough money. I mean, if we'd worked out these digital revenue streams and figured out a master global database of all the rights, people would be getting paid a lot more money. And, sure, people have said this, that Spotify shouldn't have launched until they track down all the correct licenses and were able to pay out all the mechanical royalties. And that's a fair argument. But the thing is that they would have never been able to track down all these licenses with the system that's currently in place. So it's like, okay, technically, yes, they are carrying out illegal activity. Yes, like by definition and by the law, it is illegal what Spotify is doing. But if they hadn't done it, piracy would be as large as it is. And the thing is, the studies were done last year. They calculated piracy in Norway, which is one of the first places that Spotify launched back in 2009. And in 2009, it was like, I think it was 80% of the Norway population was pirating music. And then in 2014, only 2% of the population was still pirating music because of streaming. So it's like, at least streaming is paying something, whereas piracy doesn't pay anything. So like, we're not there yet, but at least we're moving in the right direction.
Well, I was going to say, here's kind of the follow the chain of culpability in terms of, we go back to pre-Spotify. How does Spotify get their content to launch? How do they get the raw files? How do they acquire the catalog? If the digital distributor is the responsible party that handed over files to say, okay, we've got X catalog of 3,000 titles. I mean, geez, aren't the distributors somewhat responsible and also in this loop of saying, by the way, this is the list of rights holders for these, and also, how in the hell does something like Netflix get started and operate and not have these kinds of, huge legal rights holders related issues?
Absolutely. And I would argue that one of the things that Spotify should have done and actually should do from here on out is require that distributors provide all this information, because it's a lot easier for the distributors to track down all of the ownership rights for each track that they're distributing than it is for Spotify to track down millions and millions of names and addresses and ownership breakdowns for every song that's in their catalog. So Spotify, they made a mistake. They should have required all this information. But the thing is that the distributors didn't provide it because they weren't asked. Like I talked to actually a few different digital distribution companies and putting this piece together, and they said the same thing. We would have provided it had Spotify asked or had anybody asked, but nobody asked. So what's our incentive? Like, why should we make more work for our clients and customers, and our labels?
Because
and our artists?
don't they want to make money like everybody else? I mean, that's, to me, it feels like that's the obvious.
Well, the distributor isn't going to be making any of these mechanical royalty money, so there's really no financial incentive for them. So they're going to be making, because Spotify will pay the distributors directly all the royalties for the stream for the sound recording, and so the distributor doesn't, because the distributor has the right to distribute the file, the music to all these streaming services. For the sound recording, and the way that the system is set up now, which is broken as we see, they don't actually care, or they're not getting paid the composition royalty, so they don't care to provide that information. So they're like, well, it's out of our hands. It's up to you, Spotify, now to pay all these songwriter royalties. So that's why they just have no financial incentive to care about it.
Essentially, we need a double opt-in system for new uploads to Spotify, right? We need to make sure we have the license for the sound recording. We need to make sure we have the license from the composer. If you don't have both of those things checked, the song's not available publicly. If you put that on the labels, I think they would get that taken care of, right? Because they need their songs to be promoted, distributed. The listeners want to hear their favorite artist release on time. So if Spotify just or Apple or any of the streaming services put their feet in the ground, stood strong, and said, we're not going to release any more music until you fill in the blank for us. Who owns this, so we don't get in trouble legally? Because when it comes down to it, you see all of the bad press about Spotify. I think, in 2015 alone, we had Aloe Black, Kevin Kadish, who wrote All About That Bass. He's a co-writer on All About That Bass. They were, slamming Pandora primarily at the time, but they were saying, we're getting 160 million streams and we've made $5,000. How is that fair, right? So to the average public, they think, wow, this is really, really convenient for me. I love streaming music. I don't really want to go back to buying records, but I know my favorite artists are getting screwed. I don't really like that, but this is so convenient, I'm not going to stop. So, right?
Right. So and I think that's it's a great point, because the thing is that I think in this new era that we're moving towards, like, yes, part of the industry and part of us should be focusing on trying to get paid for the recorded music and from these digital services, and make as much money as we can.
If you're an artist, but what if you're just a songwriter?
Yeah, exactly. And I think I think that the royalty structure breakdown is wildly unfair to songwriters. It's not fair that artists from a Pandora stream make 14 times more what songwriters do from a Pandora stream. That doesn't make any sense. It's an outdated structured system from radio royalties from way back in the day that they said, well, the songwriter, the artist is it's actually on multiple fronts. I mean, it's the same reason. It's totally backwards in the sense that when you get a play on terrestrial radio, that artists don't get paid anything when you get paid, but songwriters do. Right. And so the structure is totally messed up. And I think that songwriters, I think that composition royalties and the sound recording royalties should be equal. They are equal for the most part in when you sync, in sync royalties, like when you license a song to television. For the most part, they get paid the same amount for the composition and the sound recording. Now,
correct me if I'm wrong here, but isn't perhaps one of the reasons that the record labels like paying out the royalties to songwriters is so that they can negotiate a lower rate than the statutory rate? So, for example, if I am an unknown writer and I wrote a song and I somehow got it into Maroon 5's management, and they say, we love this track, we want to use it on the next Maroon 5 album, but we're going to give you half of the statutory rate. And as an unknown songwriter, that's a fantastic deal for me. All right, great. I will do that, because now I have a credit. I'm going to get paid very little, but I'll have some recognition. So hopefully I can get a good rate the next time.
Absolutely, exactly, and that is put in contracts. It's called the controlled composition clause, and that's put into contracts of a lot of artists who also write their own songs, and they basically put in the contract saying, even though you write your songs, we're going to pay you less than the legal rate that we are required to pay you, because the U.S. government sets that mechanical royalty rate, but they say that they're going to pay them less. So yes, I mean, the labels are able to pay that out.
So how does that translate into the streaming world where, it's not done automatically at the time of transaction, where, say, iTunes just gives the digital, the percentage of the digital purchase to the label, and then the label takes care of paying their writers?
Right. So theoretically, this could be better in the long run for songwriters because they can't get paid a below legal or market rate like the labels could do. So the labels aren't paying out these these mechanical royalties from streaming. The streaming services are, but on the flip side is
not paying them out.
Really the songwriters, they're not just getting, they're not getting anything. So even though it theoretically could be a higher royalty rate, they're still not.
So the grumpy old man in me comes out and says, so the labels found a way to screw the one part of the music industry that was seemingly impossible to be screwed with. The songwriters now can't get paid, as well as the artists not getting paid. So just
yeah.
All right, so let's wrap up this topic.
Well, hold on. I got
go
one more thing
Go
here
ahead.
that is I think is kind of interesting, because when we talk about this global database and we're looking to potentially and I won't throw CSAC under the bus on this. But a part of me wonders if they are really, equipped to take on this role of trying to come up with a global mastermind, database for songwriters and sound recordings. However, there is this very interesting private company that at last conversation I had with some people at HBO, they actually do the actual time tracking for sync licenses, and that is Shazam.
Mm-hmm.
And Shazam is an interesting idea in the fact that it captures audio. It looks for, it's not even necessarily it doesn't have to listen to a whole song. Take a snapshot, analyze that waveform against something else, make sure see if it checks with something in their catalog or library. Now, obviously, we've all Shazammed something that came up blank. However, it is a private company, but so is Harry Fox, and CSAC is it's a for-profit venture. How uniquely could something like Shazam, with a little bit of AI behind it, start to play the role of being this global database, and administering that?
I think, we're definitely moving towards audio recognition software, within across the entire industry and across all royalty tracking systems. There are a lot of networks, and if HBO is one of them, I don't know the whole list of all the networks that are doing this, but they're using audio recognition software to create their cue sheets, and it's why you're seeing fewer and fewer non-exclusive licensing deals out there, meaning that traditionally you could find a bunch of different companies, and as long as they didn't pitch you to the same TV shows, you could work with a bunch of different companies, and they would each only make money when they pitched you successfully to a TV show or a commercial or something like that, and they got it used. Whereas now, networks don't want to work with non-exclusive licensing companies anymore because of audio recognition software. Because if they plug this song through their audio recognition software and there's 5 different licensing companies all saying that they own the rights to this one song, it's too confusing for them to figure out who actually pitched it to them and who they have to pay and everything like that. So we're definitely moving there. And I know that ASCAP and BMI, and I'm assuming CSAC as well, have been working on audio recognition software themselves to be able to track down the performance royalties. So that is definitely the future, and that's going to be the best way to actually create and figure out this global database. And the information is mostly out there, but even if a song is caught by Shazam doesn't actually have all of the breakdowns of all the composers, all of their corresponding publishing companies who played on the track. Like, very few people actually know that if you are a backup musician on a track and you get played on Pandora, you are entitled money from that as a session player. So I mean, that information needs to be there as well. So there's a lot of information that needs to be added, and the most of the info is around at various places. Like allmusic.com has some of it, ASCAP has some, US Copyright Office has some, but it's so fragmented that it's very difficult. But yeah, that's where we need to go for sure.
The other problem I see with voice or recognition of audio is cover songs, right? So a 13-year-old girl could cover an Ari Herstand song, post it on YouTube, get hundreds of millions of views, generate a lot of ad revenue. How does Ari Herstand get Shazammed from that and get paid when this is a recording that, has not been registered with anyone? There's no sort of documentation for it. It's just, there's a lot of holes in that.
Well, what Shazam is, I don't know if Shazam is working on this, but I'm sure that I talked to a digital fingerprinting company, and they weren't at the time working with Shazam, but I'm sure by the time they launch it, they will be. And they traditionally worked with like Getty Images on placing these invisible fingerprints on them, so you could track where the Getty Images files are going. It was basically like a filter that was put on the image, and they're working on the same kind of filter that it's an inaudible by the human ear filter that every song they're trying to get to go through. So even if a 13-year-old girl uploaded the song to YouTube, YouTube, before putting it on their service, could run that audio file through this filter to know, and then it would be tagged with that specific filter.
How will YouTube know it's a cover?
Well, then, I mean, they should require similar that Spotify should require from the distributors. YouTube should require from the user who the original artist is, if it is a cover or something like that.
Well, you mentioned that in your article. There's several different versions of Butterfly, like different song, different same title, different song. So
those, because those are distributed on Spotify, they would know that by this audio recognition software, because if they went through the system, they would know that each one is a cover.
Okay.
So it's possible, and artists are actually doing this at live shows. This technology currently exists, and some of the big artists are putting this digital audio fingerprinting technology into their board. And so the audio that comes out of the speakers at a live concert have been run through this filter that the human ear can't really hear, but technology can hear. And so all of the users that are recording the live show and then upload it to YouTube can immediately be pinged that it's by this artist, and they can immediately start generating royalties from that.
Just wait for the audiophiles to complain that it causes artifacts, or the hi-hats aren't as crisp because of that digital fingerprint. Okay, so before we move on, what are your guys' predictions? Is the lawsuit going to hold up? Is David Lowery going to be the hero of every songwriter who's ever had a song placed on Spotify?
Oh, there's another lawsuit launching this week by the lawyers who won the Turtles Sirius XM case. So I mean, this is one of many that are launching because they legally have a valid case. I don't know if it's going to. It's a really good question. I mean, this would be a game changer and turning point. I mean, I don't think that they're going to have to pay out $150 million. I think they're going to come to some kind of agreement.
So you do think it's unquestionable Spotify is at fault? There's going to be some kind of, if not out-of-court settlement, some kind of litigation that is going to
by the law, they are at fault. There's no disputing that they... Spotify and Apple Music and Tidal and every other streaming service are committing illegal acts. That's plain, like it's clear. And there's no disputing that. But I feel like a judge could sympathize because of the system is so broken that it's nearly impossible to actually follow the law.
Or lobbyists will get involved in.
Or lobby.
So is the solution not? I mean, the thing is that this suit could go through and nothing would change. potential. Let's say they win and Spotify goes, okay, great, I cut you $150 million check, go away. The thing is a part of me is
they
like,
would change. I would say.
Oh, yeah.
I think like the best thing that's
is
going to come from
$150
this.
million ding enough of that? I mean, I would think that someone would be more aggressive and go after. I mean, if this is so rampant and so widespread, make it $1 billion lawsuit. Go to Apple and force Apple's hand to institute a new industry-wide practice. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing is that it's at least $150 million because technically the law says that if you've committed willful infringement,
Yep.
That's $150,000 per infringement, so per song. So it could be a lot more if they really tallied up all the songs that they've infringed upon, which someone could. So I think this is one of many, and if they don't solve this or figure this out, they'll just keep getting sued. So $150 million isn't really a lot to Spotify right now, but there's another lawsuit launching this week for who knows how much it's going to be, and they'll just keep coming until they realize there's definitely an issue. And I think next on the agenda or something is Spotify has created. It has started to address this and started to create a database and try to fix this already.
Well, I would say 150 million is a sizable amount to Spotify. They're valued at what last heard $7 or $8 billion. That's going to be a decent percentage of their overall market value. So I mean, they have to be concerned. I don't think there's anyone at Spotify that's just happy to write $150 million check.
I say that somewhat coarsely. However, to me, I would think that you would get potentially more traction for an industry-wide change if someone directed that activity at Apple. And maybe this is just a shot fired across the bow to say, hey, you know what? This is Spotify, and they are we could do you a favor and knock them off of the competition radar. But ultimately, I just don't think Spotify has the resources or the pull to make a whole industry kind of sit up and change their deal. Whereas Apple, if the minute Apple said, here's the thing, we're sick of your accounting practices, music industry, you suck, we don't deal with this, we set up iTunes as a solution for your piracy problems, it worked well, now we're moving to streaming, we're going to set up a solution here, and if you don't comply, you're not going to be there. Right. You're just not going to be there.
I agree. I think Apple really should be the ones to lead this charge and address it. I'm surprised because they've been in the music game for so long before Spotify, that they didn't actually require from the distributors to provide all of this information. Maybe they will from here on out. But yeah, and to be absolutely frank, why Apple isn't in this yet and I've talked to sources that have said they're just terrified of Apple because they're this they're the most powerful company in the world, and they're the number one company in the entire world. So they're afraid to go up against Apple. That's really the thing that was what it comes down to. So unfortunately, Apple is just so gigantic that people are terrified to go against them. But hopefully, I don't know, someone will sue them and they'll make some headlines and so everybody will just come together and be like, all right, this is an issue, let's all get together and solve this.
Well, I have the solution. The solution is, and we can't go an episode without mentioning her name, Taylor Swift drops a note to Eddie Q and says, Eddie, help us fix this.
On Twitter, no less. Yeah. It'll all be done publicly.
Yes.
and it's done. Eddie will have it wrapped up in a weekend and we're rolling. Everything's hot in the hamper, ready to rock.
Totally.
So.
Yeah. Totally.
Okay. Let's kick this thing to the curb.
So we're going to kind of venture down a rumor mill sort of path, or maybe hypothetical prediction path. There was an article on Medium about Netflix and how they're just basically outclassing everyone who is doing traditional TV. I think 3 out of the top 5 shows on Rotten Tomatoes were Netflix shows. The other 2 were from Amazon. So no traditional network television shows are among the high-ranking TV shows currently. So we have to wonder if Netflix and Amazon are able to take their user information, see what their users are interested in watching, and then create content that successfully fulfills those qualifications. How long is it going to be until, say, Apple or Spotify or any of the other services follow suit and they become original content creators? Do you guys think this is ever going to happen, or is it just kind of a pipe dream?
To be honest, would love to see it happen. I think it would be really great for the industry at large if Spotify or Apple or one of these companies actually funded and acted as the label for the artist, but they didn't use the traditional label structure or system, and they went about it completely differently in by not employing people from the traditional music field. Unfortunately, Apple's already done that with Jimmy Iovine. But I feel like if Spotify launched something like this, everybody likes to say that Spotify hates artists and they're only in it for themselves. But I would wager a bet that Spotify's deal that they would create if they were to launch an original project that they funded would be much more favorable to the artist than any of the major label deals out there.
So when this conversation comes up, because this is not an entirely original thought, people always say, yeah, but Apple doesn't want to piss off the music industry, or Spotify doesn't want to piss off the music industry. The labels then will pull their catalogs. But this is never an issue with, say, a network a studio that might license their movies to Netflix. They don't go, oh, you better not make your own content, Netflix, or we're not going to, right? There's money to be made here. They'd prefer that they stay out of the original content. But of course, if Apple starts making original content, the labels won't completely pull out.
I don't think they would. Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's enough room for everyone, and it would be based on quality, because the thing is that, I mean, there's so much music out there, so the labels don't really care that I can upload a song directly, that I can distribute a song today and it's on all the services tomorrow. They're not really competing with me because I don't have their marketing budget, and I don't have, I'm not on that same scale. The thing is if if Spotify started competing on that same scale of superstardom and starting to take over the charts, then it would be something else. The thing is where it's tough to make as much of a comparison because Netflix isn't a Spotify. Netflix doesn't have virtually 100% of all of the movies and TV shows ever released, whereas Spotify, for the most part, has virtually every song ever released, save for, Prince, Taylor Swift, and Adele. But the thing is so it's tough. I feel like Netflix had a little bit more room to experiment because they weren't getting all the premiere shows and movies.
Well, you mentioned a marketing budget. I mean, obviously the big cards that both Spotify and Apple could pull out is you'd be on the front page as soon as you log into the app. Boom, there's the new release from Ari Herstad, Apple artist, right?
And included in all the playlists. I mean, playlists are the new radio.
Playlists are essentially, I shouldn't say curated playlists in particular, are already like some sort of, you've gotten past the gatekeeper. It's the first step, right? It's the new
radio.
Watch,
it's the new radio. Yes. Yeah, it's the new discovery mechanism that people on streaming services are using.
I mean, there certainly is no shyness from Netflix or Amazon to let you know when they put a new release out, right? It's the very first thing, and then it'll pop up every time you click any category. Hey, have you heard of The Orange Is the New Black? Do you know we put out a new season of House of Cards, right? It's everywhere.
Totally, and that costs Netflix nothing.
Exactly.
That's the thing, is they don't actually have to. They do market their shows a little bit with billboards and
I think I've seen a CNN ad or something.
Yeah, they'll occasionally run ads on other networks. But the thing is if Spotify were to launch an artist, they could do it for zero marketing money, and they could theoretically launch a superstar because they get them included in all the hot playlists. They put them right on the front page of Spotify, and it's very. I mean, I've seen this happen. I mean, it happened with Lorde. I mean, Spotify didn't finance Lorde, but the thing is Royals got included on Sean Parker's Hipster International Spotify playlist, and then she started trending on Spotify through the viral charts, and that started everything. Spotify is the reason that everybody knows Royals.
Well, she had a huge radio campaign as well. I mean, she started on Adult Contemporary.
That was after.
No. She started on Adult Contemporary, and then they slowly moved her over to Top 40. You were hearing Royals for months on the Adult Contemporary stations before they moved her to the pop stations. So
yes,
I mean, there was definitely some money backing the Lorde.
There absolutely was, but there wasn't any money dedicated towards U.S. radio until she went viral on Spotify charts. That's the thing, is New Zealand launched her. New Zealand She was a label from New Zealand, and she wasn't on the radio before Sean Parker put her on a playlist.
All right, we
can go check the
that's
stats.
just we'll agree to disagree there. But we don't have. I don't have the
I'll send you the
stamp for
timeline.
the first time I heard it.
I'll send you the timeline.
All right.
I wrote about it.
Okay.
The thing is that both of these, we're looking at data-driven solutions. Much of the same way we talked about a data-driven solution probably has to be the best solution for the accounting and royalty woes on getting rights holders paid. The reason why Netflix isn't just like shooting things in the dark. I mean, House of Cards was originally a BBC show that Netflix literally said, we're seeing these are the hot views. This is what's getting watched. This is what's getting essentially getting played. And these are the artists that are getting these are the actors that are would be hot for this kind of role, and we know that viewers will watch them. Spotify, Apple Music, Tidal should be the best positioned for this.
Right.
If they are so-called artist controlled. It's just weird to me that nerddom hasn't really taken that next step over, because it's right at their fingertips. The data's there. All you have to do is kind of put the things together and make some proposals.
And that's the thing. I think it's important to note that the reason Netflix is succeeding on such a mass scale is because of the data, because they've been analyzing their viewers, their customers for years, knowing what shows they like, how much of each show each person gives the show, how much time they give it until they click, until they leave it and like, all right, moving on to something else. The related shows, because they've been analyzing all their data to death, they know what kind of shows to create. All the streaming services could do the same thing. They know what similar artists are that people are listening to. They know how long they listen to each song until they move on, how they discover music, the same thing. It is really frustrating that Tidal hasn't been doing anything about this. I mean, they started their Tidal Rising program, which is kind of trying to focus and feature some independent artists because of the backlash they got at their launch, when they really didn't talk about any independent artists, and they were just basically saying that all of us millionaire musicians, we want you to pay us more money, and that's why there was such a backlash against Tidal. Whereas now they're starting to focus on some independent artists, but they're not funding anyone.
No.
If they actually put their money behind it and said, okay, these are the artists that we know, that we believe in, and we know how to position them on our service because we've analyzed the data to death. We know how to position them in the point where they will succeed. Because any artist that any of these streaming services launch or fund should theoretically succeed if they've analyzed the data properly.
Right. You have to think that Apple's probably in the best position to do something like this. They've been in the business the longest in terms of the music industry. They've got iTunes data. They've got the Genius feature. If you guys remember that, I don't know if anyone actually uses it, but they're clearly taking your information. What are you listening to? Uploading it to their servers and then spitting back music to you, right? So if they're able to do that, they could say, well, we listen to this song at this many beats per minute in this key with this producer. I mean, they could put that all together and have the.
I would even say that maybe even more uniquely targeting and maybe even better at this would be Google and YouTube.
They've definitely got the data as well, right?
They've got the data and it's fairly flat. They've, in terms of it's not a huge. It doesn't require a ton of heavy lifting to figure out. Google's or YouTube's recommended watching is, for me, from my experience, has just been ridiculously a lot of it's just like it's affiliated, but a lot of it, their suggestions are really, really good. And there are players in the game. So
absolutely,
I think
with the recently launching their YouTube Red service, their YouTube Music service, that is specifically to compete with Spotify and Apple Music. I mean, I think they're in a very good position to do that. And they actually, YouTube is one that are. They have funded original programming and original content.
Not super successfully though, right?
That's also true, right?
Yep.
So unfortunately, right. So it's. I mean, they went a few different ways. Is they failed initially when they tried to bring in superstars from the physical world, not the YouTube superstar world, and then give them their own shows and that kind of stuff. And that didn't work because the YouTube audience appreciates authenticity, and they appreciate kind of average Joes doing their own stuff on YouTube. And so I think that's why you're starting to see more of the multi-channel networks funding shows like Maker Studios and Fullscreen and stuff like that. They have started to fund some YouTube series that have done pretty well on for YouTube standards.
Sure. Yeah, so YouTube was they actually opened a studio, right? A physical place. And they would bring talent in, both YouTube stars and, as you mentioned, like real world stars. I guess that's kind of, it's hard to draw the line on that in 2016, but real world stars would come to YouTube, like Michael Scott's YouTube is here, and they would make content, and it was just falling flat on its face. No one really wanted that. They wanted the cat videos. They wanted, like you said, the authenticity. It'll be really, really interesting to see if, I guess that would be the one argument against YouTube starting original music content, is that their audience does tend to skew a little bit more ADD, where they're not necessarily sitting down and, say, putting on music while you do some of your work, right? That's where you go to iTunes, and affluent people that might have a lot of money to spend on apps and MacBooks and iPhones are going to come to the iTunes store and say, oh, look at this new artist. Let me check them out. Whereas I think the lifespan of a YouTube artist or a YouTube channel might be a little bit shorter, right? These things tend to last, I'm just grabbing for like maybe 12, 18 months. Someone's a huge star, and then they kind of tend to drop off. The PewDiePies and those might last a little bit longer, but I can't think of too many people who just blew up on YouTube and have done so for a decade plus.
I mean, what would be nice to see is if YouTube actually rewarded their top creators more than just the pitiful ad revenue that they're sharing at 55% with the creators. So they could reward them. So, they don't need to pick people out of obscurity and say, all right, let's turn you into a star because we like that one song we heard at an open mic last night. They're already a platform that they're developing on. And once they've developed to a point where they've actually built an audience, then YouTube can start helping their operation and start funding them some more because they've grown up on YouTube. They've figured out how to build an audience on YouTube, and it would be to YouTube's benefit if they rewarded them more in the ad revenue. That's the reason that Patreon launched, is because these super successful creators on YouTube were not making enough money to live on from their millions upon millions upon millions of views on YouTube. And so that's a disconnect. And YouTube added like a tip feature on some channels, which is just pathetic because, they're still relying on like fans to like tip them, whereas YouTube has the money. They could just reward and basically pay their biggest creators. And, even if they're top 1,000 creators, they could pay them a livable wage to just keep doing what they're doing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Chris, do you have anything else you want to say about this?
No, I feel strongly about everything that we've said, and
I think it sounds like we're all in agreement, right? It would be a great thing. I think
our three brains could take over and do a better job.
It would be a great thing if more people made content and made better deals with the people who are making the content.
Totally.
All right, so we've got one more story for today. And this broke a couple weeks ago, but we had a show to recap 2015 last week, so we didn't get to talk about it. Art is Murder, which I had never heard of Art is Murder, but they're apparently a very, very successful heavy metal group. Their vocalist just quit, and the press release that he put out cited lack of income as one of the primary reasons for leaving. Now, on the surface, if you're a young artist right now who wants to become a heavy metal star, right? I sound like an old man, a heavy metal star. But let's say you're in a heavy metal band and you want to be huge. You want to take over the world. If you look at Art is Murder, they're on a label with artists like Slayer, Symphony X, Machine Head, Fear Factory. Check out their Facebook page. They've got about 500,000 likes. They've done world tours, traveled the world over multiple times. But yet, the lead singer says over the last 6 to 7 years, they've made between $16,000 and $18,000 for each band member total. Not $16,000 a year, $16,000 spread out over 6 to 7 years, which I did the math on that. It's about $50 a week for 6 years. So the discussion that I would like to have, and I'm really glad that Ari's here for this. We brought Ari in for the Spotify issue, but I think you're the perfect person to shed some insight on it. Is this complete BS? Yeah. Are these guys just the biggest morons on the planet, or
ding ding ding?
or what is going on here? How can this is not the first time I've heard such a story where an artist that seemingly is very successful can't pay their bills, right? So what's going on here? How can this exist in a music industry that is still generating $10 billion a year, that yet the artists make far less than minimum wage?
If those numbers are correct, that it was $16,000 total, not even a year, then they're horrible at managing their money. Then the blame is on them, because that's absurd. Like I could step into their operation for a day, and I could if that's really all the money they're making, and come up today with 10 revenue streams that would generate 10 times that amount within the first year, if those are their real numbers. So they either have horrible managers, horrible business managers, or their label, or they signed a 360 deal with their label where they're not getting paid anything. That's a possibility. I think
that's more than likely, yeah.
If they sign a 360 deal with their label, where the label is entitled to every single dollar that comes in, regardless if it's from touring, merchandising, VIP sponsorships, or sales, or royalties, or anything, and they're only paying them out a very little amount, then yeah, those numbers could be accurate, and I would advise no one to sign a 360 deal with any label, because that's how they can screw you.
When you look at it, they did a few world tours, but they were both the tours they did, they were opening acts, right? So they're probably not getting anything or very little to be on that tour.
They probably paid to play.
They're probably paid to play, so that's going to add to their debt to their label, right? They're not going to be selling any records, because no one sells records. But I guess, to be fair to the heavy metal artists, the one genre that tends to, in all of this the data that comes out, it seems like heavy metal artists or heavy metal fans like to buy records more than some other genres. But for the most part, sales are going to be down. 500,000 Facebook likes, well, that can be bought, that can be faked, that can be just you saw them on YouTube and you like their Facebook page. Doesn't mean you contributed any money to them. So give us a few examples, Ari. What would you do if you knew you had an audience of 500,000 people, which I think everybody listening to this podcast who's an artist would love to have access to 500,000 people to sell them their wares. Sure. What would you do? Crash 5 minutes plan. How can you make some money for this band?
Right. I don't, I've never heard them, and I've never seen them. So, that would spur some other ideas, but just right off the bat, if they haven't prioritized merchandising, I have numbers actually from, I just pulled them up. I have numbers from At Venue, which is this new startup company. They're the premier, they're the ones being used by the most in the industry right now. Inventory tracking and point of sale merchandising at live shows. And so they're being used by most people, top to bottom, touring artists. And what they've calculated is that I'm looking at my chart here, a metal artist averages $4.75 per head in merch a show. So wow. Even if they were the opening act and they paid, $100 or something per show, or maybe they paid $3,000 for the entire tour, more likely. But if they were playing for 1,000 people a night, that's $4,750 each night in merchandising if they did their merchandising right. Now, that money just doesn't fall out of thin air. You have to create merch that people want to buy. You have to know how to pitch it. You have to set up your merch table effectively and properly. You have to have people who know how to sell it. So that's number one. I would take a look at their merchandising and how they're doing it. Let's say they're kicking ass at merch already and they already know how to do that. I would look at what kind of VIP options that they're offering to their fans, because Nielsen came out with a study a couple years ago that said that music fans would spend collectively up to $2.6 billion more a year if they were offered exclusive access and VIP options, exclusive content, I should say, and VIP access and options. So fans want that kind of stuff. So I would say for each show, offer for $150 to 10 people. 10 people, you can bring them backstage and you can hang out for a little bit and you know, drink a beer and hang out and whatnot. And so there's that. There's, if their label allows it, or, you know, for independent artists or depending on what their label structure is, I think Bandcamp's new model of a subscription service is actually something really cool and really worth paying attention to. It's similar to like the Patreon model, but it's basically a fan club. That's all it is. It's just like starting a fan club where a fan can pay you, you know, $40 a year or $5 a month or something like that, and they get exclusive content. You interact with them. So there's those kinds of revenue possibilities. Just immediately that would work for pretty much any artist that has a sizable fan base. Those three things alone would bring in substantial immediate revenue if we just did it tomorrow, you know?
Yeah, that's some very good points. So they're just, as I think, Chris, you chimed in right away, ding. They're not, or their label more than likely, because let's be honest here, a lot of bands just want to be artists. They don't really want to think about the business. They want to have that taken care of for them. So their label is probably dropping the ball for their artists, which is, in the end, reducing their ability to produce, right? So it's the production that they want is not being satisfied because they've cut off the production capability of the band, in essence.
I don't know. You know, you'll run into this, especially in some places like South by Southwest, and you'll see guys that they will credit card, you know, some money losing tour to, you know, just to say that they've been someplace. And then, you know, and on a broader scale, I've seen some so-called management companies that will gobble up, you know, it's like a meat grinder of, you know, particularly around, you know, these kind of harder core musical styles. And they'll sign a bunch of young pups, you know, either still in high school or fresh out of high school. They'll put them on these tours where there's, you know, 6 bands on a bill and nobody is making money except for the headliner. And even the headliner at that is, you know, it's somewhat sketchy. And I just, when you brought this story up a couple of weeks ago, I was just like, this to me reeks of, you know, of someone who just, they're not watching how to do this. And they, you know, and they're pointing fingers at, you know, well, we didn't make any money and, you know, so I'm going to take my toys and go home. And when it's like, dude, your responsibility to make money. And for any musicians that are listening to this, you are responsible for making your money. Your label's not going to make you money if you can't do it on your own.
Right.
You know, and it's just like, you know, figure out a way to make things break even at first, at least, or don't do it. You know, I mean, that's,
you know, it was interesting. I talked to Ingrid Michelson's manager, Lynn Grossman, in preparation for the book. I interviewed her. And I asked her, how does she, like, how have they made their tours profitable, or have there been losing tours, especially when they went on opening tours and stuff like that? And she said, honestly, we have never gone on a losing tour ever. We have never lost money on the road. Because they were smart about how they did it. They didn't go, you know, they didn't rent a $30,000 a month tour bus when they weren't at that level. She said, like, she piled into her mom's minivan with her best friend and went around and did shows that way when they could only draw 50 people, you know? So it's like, there's smart ways to go about your career, and then there are dumb ways to do it. And, buying on a tour where you're the first of 6 bands because the headliner's really cool, but you only get a 15-minute set, that's not the way to do it. And especially, like, yeah, you said in this more hardcore community, I see these pay-to-play festivals that structured like that, you know, I see them all the time, and they're infuriating, but at the time, it's like, it's the artist's responsibility to educate themselves and to really manage their money and figure out how to make their business work.
Some good points all around. Well, I believe we've exhausted all of the time we have, but so
Ari, it's been great having you on.
Yeah, absolutely.
I continue to, see your name pop up and read your material, and it's been great. I can't wait to read this book. I'm excited. That's awesome.
All right, on.
Want to plug the title again? I didn't write it down the first time.
Yeah, well, I'll plug my blog because that's more immediate.
Right
The
on.
book's not going to come out for about 8 months, but the blog is just aristake.com. It's aristake.com. I would say check that out.
Subscribe as a Patreon supporter to the blog.
Yeah, I'm on Patreon. Right,
You
absolutely.
contribute that way. Of course, your career as a songwriter and performing artist, ariherstand.com, is that right? Yeah, so
Yep,
you can check out
that's
the
right.
tunes there, and available on all streaming services everywhere, I assume.
And
well.
look up
That's true.
Ari's cameo on Mad Men.
Yes.
That's also
And
true.
any more acting? Are you still acting? All right.
I am still acting. I think during this call, I just got an audition that came through,
nice.
which I'm probably going to go run to. I acting. I'm in LA, and it's just one of many things that I'm doing. I'm not necessarily focusing on it, but when auditions come in, I'll go out and audition. If I get it, I'll go do the part, do the job. So it's just something fun to do since I'm out here. So
That's awesome. Cool.
yeah. Right on.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for this week. Chris, are you going to stay in the continental United States now? Yeah. We can find you tweeting at...
I'm at Drew Chowen, DREWCHOWEN.
Do you think you're going to have time to do any updates from CES? Are you going to be tweeting about CES or?
And I probably will. They will be my opinions are solely mine and not the responsibility of anybody else's kind of deal. But
Right on.
we'll see. It's a crazy place, Las Vegas.
Chris, I've
for
always
CES.
wondered, why is it Drew Chowen? Where does that name come from?
we've actually covered
why
this.
Drew and not Chris?
We've actually covered
Did
this
you
in a
cover this?
previous-
Because I've wondered this for
Ari,
years.
Ari, do you
Literally
suggest
years.
I just change this to Chris? No. It's a pseudonym I developed a while back when I was working on a project that I didn't necessarily want to be directly affiliated with. So I took the name of the street I grew up on and the name of the street behind it. So if you're a Minneapolis head,
Gotcha.
Drew Chowen, there are two streets that run parallel. And so it just kind of stuck. I don't know. I should probably make the world a simpler place by just going
I know
with
you
my
by
name.
both names now. I mean, from the digital world and the physical world, and I'm always confused at which one I should use.
And the two shall never meet. No, at some point, I don't know.
Alter
maybe
ego.
They forever run parallel.
Yes.
Stick with
Okay,
right.
there we go.
Awesome. Well, I am at David Swift on Twitter, and I think that is going to conclude this week's episode. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, and thanks again to Ari for joining us this week, and we hope to talk with you again soon.
Great chat.
All right. Everyone can